Hi guys, I'm Kevin Secours, founder and head instructor of Integrated Fighting Systems here in Montreal, Canada. One aspect of our training that I get perhaps the most questions about is this idea of working with limitations. People will see all sorts of video of myself and my students on the internet working with our hands tied in various configurations, working with our legs bound, working with gags on our mouth to limit our breathing, working with bags on our head or in states of disorientation, spinning or with strobes or with low light. And the natural question this always begets is it really something you think you're going to have to face? Do you really expect to ever have your hands cuffed and have to fight your way out of it? Well, for most of us, the short answer is no. The probability of ever having to face that type of specific threat is quite low. It might be an inflated fear. We might have this worry when we travel, fear of being taken hostage or being taken captive. And there's absolute value in addressing any fear and replacing it with familiarity in our own training. But much more than the actual direct end application, the fundamental goal of working with limitations is to enhance our overall understanding of our body and to increase our awareness of other opportunities, other potential that we might not have otherwise realized. When we have a single hand tied, especially if it's our preferred strong arm, then naturally the rest of our body is expected to work in different ways. We gain newfound awareness of how to use our legs. If my sight is deprived or affected, then I have to go internally. I have to rely much more on touch. So somebody that's instinctively much more of a boxer is much more visually cued. And then when they don't have that touch, they have to rely on tactile sensitivity. When we work with restrained breath, we experience a whole different level of stress and fear, which is something that's directly relevant to encountering stress in any aspect of our life, certainly in a crisis or in a fight. So there's many different advantages from working with limitations. I often use the analogy of a mental map. We all have a map, a mental image that we use to flesh out all of our techniques. Over time, when we have a specific technique that we learn, if we close our eyes and try to visualize how the technique works out, if the technique's not clear in our mental map, if we can't clearly visualize the sequence of moves, then we're going to have the same difficulty to physically apply it. Visualizing and fleshing out that mental map supports physical training, and physical training massively bolsters and actualizes visualization. So I don't want to for a second imply that you can do one without the other or that you should. But having that mental map clearer, being forced to flesh it out in different ways is extremely important. When we have dark spots on our map, then what happens is we make assumptions. If you look back at the old seafaring maps, wherever they didn't know what was there, they would just say, there be dragons, here be monsters. We think that this is a whirlpool that sucks you down and the end of the world is here. That's just from a lack of exploration and understanding. But the more they explored, the more they fleshed out that map, and then when the map was complete, travel was able to be performed much more safely. So it's the exact same thing in our own training. We want to make sure that that map is as clear as possible, and we want to force ourselves to look at it from as many different perspectives as possible. In a conventional environment, very often you'll see people training symmetrically, with equal repetitions being performed with the left hand and equal reps with the right hand. They'll have left stance forward and right stance forward, and certain kicks, and repeat them over and over. And while I understand the logic behind this, I'm not really a huge proponent of this. If you are a left-hand lead fighter, there can be value sometimes in adapting and learning to modify your stance. But if I fight somebody who's a southpaw, I'm not going to modify my stance to match theirs. Rather, I'm going to learn to use my stance and adapt it to a different circumstance. Elite shooters might train some of the time to shoot with their support hand, but they will not invest equal amounts of time in both. They learn to adapt by putting themselves in different circumstances. So in my belief, if you had an option between working 50-50, left and right equally, or an option of taking your preferred stance and your preferred techniques and then depriving yourself of certain tools and finding ways to adapt, this is far more important. When we speak about true adaptability, true resiliency under stress, the ability to modify your performance based on limitations and challenges is far more relevant in an actual encounter than just doing perfectly symmetrical drilling. There's another aspect to learning to work with limitations as well, and that's the role of the partner fighting you. When we start to fight against somebody that has limitations, that has an arm tied or that has no sight, different things will happen. Physically, our techniques can change. You're trying to go for a triangle choke, but that preferred arm is tied down, then we have to modify and do an armless triangle choke. Or if we're trying to manipulate somebody, but some of the handles and grips we would normally rely on aren't there, we have to modify. Psychologically, there's also a level of inhibition that comes out. Some people become instinctively quite cruel, and it reveals that bully archetype inside of them when they have a partner that's in a state of duress. And you'll see them be quite brave and quite mischievous and malicious against that person. But the minute the tables are turned, that same person will oftentimes run away, true to bully form. Others will have very deep psychological inhibition, and they'll have difficulty attacking somebody who's in a prone state. And while that's a sign of a sane and caring and sensitive human, to some level we have to know how to capitalize on weakness if we are to defend ourselves. Sometimes in the harshest survival circumstances, you might have a very sensitive moment wherein you're gaining the advantage or regaining the advantage, and the opponent, who was previously an attacker, is now in a state of weakness. Knowing how to modify and capitalize on that is a part of self-defense, as unpleasant as it may be. So responsible power, control of aggression, learning how to capitalize on weakness, all of these things are very, very sensitively intertwined. And when we work against a partner that has limitations, we build our compassion, we build our sensitivity, but we also build that predatory sense that can sometimes be quite essential in ensuring our own survival.
All right, we're going to begin by taking a look at some ideas for working with one arm limited. Now, there are lots of ways you could limit an arm. You could simply vow not to use it in your training session. We've definitely experimented with duct tape and it works well, but it tends to be a little bit irritating and it can be a bit expensive after a while. So by far the cheapest, the easiest, the most reusable is just to have a good length of rope. Here we're going to be working with 25 foot lengths of rope, and I'm going to be showing you at the beginning a very traditional Japanese rope tying technique that will let you neutralize that arm with minimum difficulty. It will make sure that you don't injure your partner in the training process. It will give you a good limitation that replicates an injury, and most of all, it's extremely easy to untie if you follow these instructions. Let's get into it.
Here we go. So sliding knot first. So normally we go in the opposite direction to tighten. We're going to go with the direction of the loop and bring it up. Now all I want to do in this position, there's nothing holding this in place here. So I'm going to place one piece under and through the middle like this. Simple. And then I'm going to pull my section all the way through. So I've done a slip knot here. So this is going to give you a cuff that's not going to get much tighter, and the knot's not going to be too tight, so it's not going to hurt him. You can have space as long as there's not enough space that I can slip off. Easy breezy. We're going to go to the front. We're going to take one rabbit ear, basically a doubled section or a section double. I'm going to pass it underneath the groin. You want to pull that in tight. Yeah. Then I'm going to place the rope around and through that. So this is going to hold it low. So he'll have some mobility in the hand, but it's going to replicate having an injured shoulder. Make sense? Nice, tight, flattering, and comfortable. We're going to take another double section. We're going to go around the torso. And then we're going to snare that through here. So that's going to keep it closer to his body. I will show you a few times so you have it. Simple. So now if he jiggles a bit, jiggle a bit. Nice. Awesome. He has mobility, but not so much. Then I'm going to take this and I'm going to go one time with it. It's always doubled sections. One time around the arm, and I'm going to snare that in. Just to give a second point of attachment. A little less mobility. Yep. Another double section, like a seatbelt over his shoulder. And I'm going to come through that. Everybody's going to be different sizes. So bigger people, that's about as much as you're going to be able to get done. So I pull that in as tight as I can. I can always go along and ratchet a bit more, right? Make sure it's nice and comfortable. Yeah, it's good. Not too tight, but tight enough. Because I have extra, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go one more time around JB's upper arm. You always want to make sure to have it on the skin. Joke. Yeah? And now JB's smaller, so I have enough to do it a second time. So you can just get rid of any extra rope you have by doing that kind of a ratchet. Make sense? So that's enough. That's as far as I can go. So this is how I'm going to close it. The closing is the hardest. It's a half sheet knot. My rope is going through the loop. I pinch it. I go under the loop. And then I'm going to go through the loop. And I'm going to pull it back. Right? And that's all I want to see. And that's going to hold it in place. You can take any slack. It doesn't matter. You can leave it. You can stuff it. And he's good to go now. He can wiggle around. His arm has some mobility, but it's going to be stuck to his body. Simple? All right. So.
All right, guys, let's take a close-up look at how to tie that final knot. So you have your loop and you have your straight piece coming in. You pass the straight piece in through the loop. and then pull it back to ratchet it nice and tight. You can pinch it there with your thumb and fingers. Pass the length underneath the loop and then back up through it so that the tip goes back alongside the original piece. And then you should have this perfectly symmetrical half sheet knot that you can pull tight. And that's what it will look like here. So I'm going to show you that one more time. So again, the key thing to remember is that when you pass it through the loop, you can ratchet back in the opposite direction first to tighten it up, passing it in, and then I could ratchet back first, but in this case I'm just going to tie the knot, pass it underneath, back up on top, you see it clearly passing behind, up on top, and then back underneath and through in the exact same path as the original piece. And then you would just pull that end through, it would tighten it up, and this is a good reliable knot that loosens up easily when everything's done. Now, one little detail about untying your partner. The half sheet knot should be a pretty simple one to untie, and it doesn't normally get over tight. But what's infinitely more important than that is that you follow the sequence you used to tie your partner in reverse. There will often be a temptation to just slide off a whole bunch of loops or to skip a few steps and pull things off, but invariably this leads to knots. So the easiest way to avoid getting all tangled up and to make sure that your partner gets untied as quickly as possible is to follow the steps in reverse order. It's also a great mental mapping exercise to make sure that you understand it by practicing the knotting in reverse. Now once you have one arm tied up, you can start going through a variety of different range-specific drills. Beginning with striking, that's always a good alternative. Start by seeing how you can strike using figure-8 motions, using forehand and backhand motions, back fists and finger whips. Naturally progressing from hand to elbow is also a very important skill to develop. But you'll see at the beginning that just learning how to fill those targets and then slowly starting to add mobility, you can still maintain a high level of effectiveness despite having one arm restrained. Over time, your head displacement, your bobbing, your weaving, your evasions, your footwork, all of these things will start to become more natural as your balance adjusts to having that single arm tied up. You can add extra limitations as well by working from one knee, migrating onto the butt, onto the back, integrating the legs to knee or to kick. So it gives you some more opportunities, but it's harder to control and guide your fall and your engagement of the ground as you go there. So this is a fantastic way to learn how to deal with having your arm limited if you're being grabbed or held by another attacker, mobbed by a group, or whether you're injured. It's also very important to start to think about how you can shield. At minimum, keeping your hand up, using it to parry and to catch it and go into an immediate counter hit. Working with one arm tied is also an amazing way to isolate stand-up grappling. I like to revisit the clinch fight and to work through all of my basic hand fighting and basic escapes, having one partner with both arms free and one with an arm limited or inhibited. This is fantastic work for making you isolate the types of controls that still work. Head grabs, chin straps, overwraps and underhooks. These are all going to be essential skills. Something like a wizard, like you see Jordy going here, you can still maintain great control with a single arm, but the difficulty as you fall, if you go to a sacrifice, is that that arm will very naturally try to stop your flow and cause you to lose control of your opponent. Here Ian has a chin strap guillotine going into a head and arm into a tricep drag, fantastic, and then gets a nice armpit grab into a takedown. So great potential there still to choke and to control. Another great limitation is to limit respiration and sight, and both can be done at the same time with the use of a simple dollar store Star Wars pillowcase. These fantastic pillowcases have seen so much trauma. What you want to do at the beginning is you want to make sure it's not too tightly tucked in. It suffices to tuck it into their shirt, or in this case underneath the rope, and then any basic grappling, clinching, or striking drill for that matter will be extremely difficult. Striking, of course, is the most disorienting. I generally start and recommend starting with grappling. You want to be very respectful of your partner. If your partner is finding it hard to breathe, if they're getting too disoriented, then at any point you can stop. And the only thing that you can do to make this even worse is, of course, just add water. Water on top of a pillowcase, the simple thin cotton layer gets wet, sticks in your lips, makes breathing extremely difficult. It is normal and to be expected that you will tap out just from the suffocation. When you add to this the fact that they already have one arm tied and they're in their third hour of grappling and sparring, it's only a matter of time before people start to break. But it's an excellent way to really see what's inside your tank, what you have in your reserve. It's extremely challenging psychologically and physically, and a great drill that we do quite regularly throughout the year. When working, be very, very careful about adding too much cruelty to the drill. With a beginning student, you want to respect their limits and not cover their mouth or do extra things with your body to make it too difficult. Work with a training partner, not with an opponent. Slowly build up their strength so that they're able to take it, and then eventually you can progress to the highest levels of affectation and difficulty, getting into chokes and locks and making this all the more unpleasant. And then as a final step, what you see here is we've taken the bags off, but now we've maintained one arm tied, and we've done a mermaid tie on the ankles, keeping the legs together. Generally, when one arm is tied on the ground, people start to appreciate how much they can do with their legs. Whether or not they have a skilled arsenal, they start to see the capacities available in the legs. But once you tie those ankles together, you're basically limiting yourself to knee use, pendulum swings with the legs, and at best, butterfly guard. It's extremely challenging. It requires you to activate your core and use the wholeness of your body to spear with your head and to maintain control of all of your capacities.